Ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight to your first session. It was very much in keeping with what you were just talking about. As you know, last month alone, the amount of breaking news that was covered by people in this room that work in that particular section, the attack in Manchester, the attacks in London, the horror of the fire at Grenfell Towers. And our first guests were there when those stories broke, either on air, in newsrooms or on location, trying to find not just the right information, but the right words to share that with the radio audience. And television as well, of course, working across the mediums, as many of them do. Now, hosting this session is Simon Lederman from BBC London. Simon was on air when the fire broke out. His shift lasted just over 24 hours. He had to provide two ways for BBC News, BBC World, BBC Breakfast, BBC Scotland, BBC 5 Live, and stations all across the world. And joining Simon, Michelle Livesey, news editor at Key 103 in Manchester, Lydia Batham, senior multimedia journalist at Bauer Radio, plus the head of news at Sky, Dave Terris. But before we begin, let's just remind ourselves of the moment those stories broke.
Breaking news this evening. There's been a major incident at Manchester Arena. Emergency services say they're responding to reports of an explosion during the Ariana Grande gig. We've just been told from Greater Manchester Police that there have been a number of fatalities.
Welcome back. We'll have the press preview in just a moment, but I just want to bring you some breaking news. Police are saying that they are dealing with an incident on London's London Bridge. You can see the location of that crossing the Thames there. The first hint that we had that there was something happening there was a report from the managing editor of the political magazine The Spectator. In fact, he was suggesting that there were armed police attending that particular incident.
Breaking news this morning, there is a major fire which is taking place in the Latimer Road area. The tower block that I can see is a very tall tower block. It must be a kind of, looks like it's about a 10, 20, maybe 20-storey tower block. And literally there are flames from the very top to the very bottom.
OK, some breaking news on an incident in northeast London. And police say they were called to an incident in Finsbury Park at 20 minutes past midnight. And that was reports of a vehicle in collision with pedestrians. Officers are on the scene with other emergency services. Police say that there are a number of casualties being worked on at that scene and that one person has been arrested. So a number of casualties being worked on at the scene, and there has been one arrest. Inquiries continue, say the police, and that they will release more information when they can confirm it. The London Ambulance Services have also tweeted, and they've said that they have sent a number of resources to an incident in Seven Sisters Road. More information will follow when we have it, says London Ambulance. And Seven Sisters Road is in that Finsbury Park area. As soon as we get more information, we will bring it to you. More on this incident after the break. You're watching Sky World News.
Well, breaking news is our first session. Please welcome to the stage Lydia, Michelle, Dave and Simon.
Thank you, and thank you, Colin, for that welcome. We may be discussing some quite serious issues, but just to start, if you haven't yet seen Colin's Baywatch video, which is on his phone, then I suggest that at lunch that is your first, seriously, that is your first port of call. Can I also thank the Radio Festival? It's so nice to have been invited to do this under appalling circumstances, and incredibly amazing the work that the team do, including Chris and all of the team behind this, having rearranged this for obvious reasons. I was an attendee at these in the 1990s in Birmingham when Radio WM and BRMB ruled the airwaves, and BRMB used to give away a house during the Radar sweeps. I'm afraid at the BBC we used to give away an egg cup. But it seemed to work. Welcome to our panel. I'm so delighted that they're here too. We're obviously going to start with some of this in chronological order, and Michelle Livesey is news editor at Key 103 and Rock FM. Manchester has had its periods of horror, but recently it's had another episode. Where were you when that story broke?
I'd actually just got out of the cinema, so I was up and about, and I looked at my phone, and it was about, say, 10 to 11, and there was we have a senior sort of head of department's WhatsApp group, and that suddenly become very active with a few messages. And the first one was from Head of Music saying that they'd seen on Twitter that there were reports of an incident or 2 loud bangs at the arena. So there was a bit of obviously discussion around that and what that could be. Now we knew the Ariana Grande gig was on that night because we actually had from Key 103 a team of competition winners there, and we've been doing a couple of big things during the day with the fact that it was taking place in the evening. So it was at that point that I jumped on Twitter, as you do, and had a quick scan, and there was a few things, sort of rumours going around that there had been something at the arena but weren't sure what. So at that point I took the decision to just go straight into the office because it was easier to handle the situation with legitimate sources rather than sitting there on your phone and thinking what's going on. So it was about 5 to 11 when I got a phone call to say from one of the content managers at Key 103 to say what do you want to do, and I said, well, I'll go straight in to the office and we'll take it from there. But it was as I was driving in. I live about 15 minutes from the arena, and I knew by the sheer scale of the police cordon that was on the roads around there that something major had happened, because obviously on Twitter there were reports of initially that speakers had blown, or that it could have been balloons banging at the end of the concert. So, but then on top of that, you had the other vivid tweets saying that it was a suicide bomber and that there had been 2 loud explosions. So my role was to get into the office as soon as possible and try and sort of clarify rumour and fact, really.
And can I ask you about that? Because in all of our jobs, we're required to deliver many things at once. One, confirm a story. Secondly, get something out on air. Thirdly, deal with social media. Fourthly, probably deal with management saying, what the hell are you doing? How do you, being presumably late at night on your own, how do you deal with that?
You something just switches and you're just in the zone. And I think what happened with me was, as soon as I got into the office, which was about 20 past 11, I started to sort of look at the legitimate sources. So Greater Manchester Police, the arena, the ambulance service, the fire service, anybody that you could get hold of who was legitimate. The police, Greater Manchester Police, had tweeted quite quickly that they were dealing with a major incident at the arena and they were asking people to stay away. So again, you had your confirmation there, and as you said, behind the scenes there were so many conversations going on because we were as a station at Key 103 in network, which meant that we were going out across several stations across the country at the time, and we took the decision to bring it back local from 12 o'clock. But then the decisions were then being made to say, well, does the network take it, or do we hang back and see exactly what's going on first? So was it local, was it national? So there was those decisions being made, but my sort of first role was to get something out on air, and my first bulletin that I delivered was at midnight, and that was, as you say, by that point we knew that there'd been a major incident at the arena, that there'd been a number of fatalities and casualties, and I had an eyewitness at that point on the phone who was a presenter at Key 103 who lived near the arena, and he'd been there, and I'd done an interview with him, but what I did was recorded it, because at that point still you had to think to yourself, there are people listening to us right now who have kids in that arena, who are at the arena, are picking people up and didn't know what was going on. So it was a case, again, of being very careful not to speculate, not to scaremonger. So this interview I recorded with him, I made sure it wasn't saying that there had been a suicide bomber, which he was saying. It was literally about the ambulances and the scene.
The facts that you knew. We'll come back to some of that. I also want to bring in, if we can at this point, one of our other panellists, Lydia Batham, who's a senior multimedia journalist at Bauer Radio News and Entertainment. And similarly to the job that we all do, you were actually dispatched and you were on site at some, I mean, these have all been such appalling, abhorrent incidents. And you were on site at Finsbury Park and also at the Grenfell Tower fire. Grenfell Tower fire, some images we're seeing behind. Now, in terms of your preparation to pick up a phone and say there is something happening, to then go off, what do you do? What's your immediate response?
The immediate response is, I guess sometimes it's a bit of a haze. Quite often it's actually you're being woken up. So it's just a bit of confusion, and yeah, it's just getting up, getting out as quickly as you can. and on the way, just trying to get as much information as you can via the internet. You know, you're on social media, you're checking all the news websites that you can. And once you're, again, half the thing is actually getting to the place as well. Like by the time there's cordons in place, you're actually trying to get in a cab and then you can't get that close, so then you're sort of trying to make your way on foot. You don't know exactly where you're going to end up because you're putting in that, the location, but it's not actually going to take you there. And I think it's quite hard. I think as a person on the ground, quite often you know a lot less than people that are sat in their offices. And so you end up getting fed a lot of information from the people that are at their desk because they can see everything. So your job is almost just to tell a very, very visual story and to speak to the people there. And I think it's exactly what you were saying about getting the presenter to talk mostly about like the ambulances. You don't want to be speculating. You don't want to be giving facts that you don't know to be true. You might think something. You might believe something to be true, but you have to be very careful. And like I say, by the time your voice piece that you might have recorded gets on air, it might be that there's a whole lot more information. So you've got to keep it quite general.
How much emotion do you feel is right to show? Because I know that when I was sitting in a studio with very, very tiny images coming through of what was later to be very clear, a dreadful fire at Grenfell Tower. Tiny images, little thumbnails, and that is what I was basing my reporting on, doing kind of a reverse Google image search to make sure they hadn't appeared anywhere else. These were genuinely stuff that was coming through now. And that was emotional, difficult enough, knowing of the horror that was happening in that tower. When you arrived on site, first emotion, second the story, how do you deliver both?
I think it's quite a hard balance. I think when you're there, when you're doing anything, I think for work, you have to just turn a switch in your head and think about all the things that you have to do. And in radio, particularly for us, we work from hour to hour, so you have to think about all the different things that you're doing within that hour. So in that particular time, I think you can actually become quite focused on the content that you have to gather and the content that you have to deliver, and that can take you away from the emotion in that very brief moment of time. I think it's only afterwards it will hit you. I was actually at London Bridge, and it was afterwards that I think a mixture of tiredness and some of the stories that you hear from people, that's when it hits you. It's the next day, or it's 2 days later when you hear a name of someone that someone had said to you that they couldn't find, and that's when you go, oh, okay, that's really, really real.
And then it connects. And
yeah.
like Michelle, you work for a network, you work for Bauer, serving a number of stations, and presumably the demands on you to deliver not just for the news, but also for programmes when music stations change their format must be immense. I mean, how do you prioritise that? I'm guessing from the Bauer network, you're the only one on the ground at both Grenfell Tower and also at the events at Finsbury Park.
Yeah, so we have a very small team, and in fact, so at Grenfell we ended up with 2 of us, but initially it was just me. And I think that's the big thing that you notice is the huge difference between like the TV networks where you have just huge numbers of crew turn up and they've got all this support. And so, yeah, it's just you sort of with your phone, that's all we use, just going around trying to get to the right place, trying to find the right people. And so you really rely, like I said, on those people back in the office to tell you where might be the best place to be. But yeah, I think you just have to... You just deal with it as it happens. Like you say, I think at London Bridge, we did sort of break into programming in the morning, and we ended up sort of I did about 3 different live 2As in the middle of the night. But then, those decisions aren't made by me. I'm just told what to do. So,
talking of telling people what to do, thank you for that, and we'll come back because there's a number of. Colin Murray got a much better welcome and introduction, didn't he? I'm so sorry. Dave Terris is editor at IRN and Sky News Radio. Your area is incredibly tough because you're managing people and you're managing resources and you're dealing with safety and you're dealing with compliance about dispatching people to events. I mean, I wonder, you couldn't prepare for the appalling terrorist acts we've seen in this country so far this year. You couldn't prepare for the election, which was a snap election. You've told me that the holiday calendar in your organisation runs from July to June, so this month everyone is trying to get rid of their leave. How do you manage those demands on you?
Well, we're actually quite fortunate in our team is that we live and breathe news, so when something like any of these stories happen, invariably several of my team are emailing me, calling me, saying, do you need me to come in, do you need me to come in? And this is exactly what happened on these events. The thing that's common with these things, they will have all happened out of hours. The first Westminster terror attack where the PC Keith Palmer got stabbed, during the day in Millbank, where there was a whole host of journalists in the vicinity, so they were very quick to deploy to the scene and start gathering facts. Whereas Manchester, it's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, London Bridge, Saturday night, again, 10:30, late, out of hours. Not all stations are staffed at those times. You know, we're a 24-hour rolling newsroom. So we have to adjust to those demands. We've got to be making big editorial calls as to, you know, how are we going to present this? Do we send a text alert? Because all the news editors and program directors are signed up to a text alert service whereby if we've got a story which we feel is probably going to alter the output of radio stations, then we will send a text alert. It's not necessarily a breaking news service. It's designed to trigger those thoughts. Do we need to, one, call our news teams in, like probably what happened in Manchester, and two, do we have to change the output of our music? You know, on Christmas Day, George Michael died at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, so there would have been some stations in automation who might have been introducing George Michael songs without knowing that he'd died.
Without realising. Well, one of the other things I want to bring in, if we can, on this is this question of legality, because the one thing that links most of the terrorist attacks we've seen this year, but not in history, the exceptions are the killing, the murder of Fusilier Rigby, and also the Finsbury Park event. We had two groups of people, one person and a group of people alive and about to undergo a court case. And with the passions of people saying, they did it, he did it, we know exactly what happened, we know his name, and almost beginning to carry out the court case live on air. How do you, again, the question we were asking about emotion, how do you make sure that doesn't get caught up? Emotions of not your reporters necessarily, but of the public you speak to. No,
that's true. I mean, it's really, a lot of it's coming back to basics. We have to apply editorial judgment, report the facts, and those clips you saw there from our perspective on Neil and Kimberly Leonard there, they were effectively just reporting what was coming in from police press releases and attributing all the information that was coming in. There was no editorialising, this could be a terror attack, we don't know. And in fact, on the Manchester attack, we only really found out that it was potentially a terrorist attack by sort of 4 o'clock in the morning when police did a news conference saying we're treating it as potential terror. By 7 o'clock, that's when they said there's reports there was an improvised explosive device. So we're reporting those facts as it happens. Similarly, on Finsbury Park, it took a while for the police to say that we're actually treating it as terror. The way we got into that story was the fact that the Met Police confirmed that counter-terror police were investigating it. So that enables us to link potential terrorism, but we can't say for certain that it was.
And you know that, and I wonder, to link that to Lydia, when you turn up on scene at Grenfell Tower, there are many people who want to blame either the council or the landlords or the government or governments of the past. And again, people have said, well, we absolutely know it's to do with the cladding. We know it's because of discussions and voting that's taken place in Parliament. How do you allow people to have their say, but also ensure that they stick to the guidelines that we know that they don't?
I mean, for us, we're quite lucky that we're not going to put an interviewee live on air, or none of mine are, so we can make those editorial decisions back at base. We can, you might interview someone for 5 minutes, but we're only going to be playing 10 to 20-second clips of them, so you can be very careful about what bits you select and what bits you sort of highlight when you send the audio back to be edited. But yes, you're right. That was the big thing at Grenfell. You had a lot of people really in a rage about what had happened and incredibly upset. And like you say, it is all speculation. And I think particularly in this current age where there's so much criticism of mainstream media, it is quite hard. And I know that people are very upset and they don't, I think maybe, I've been thinking about this myself, maybe we need to have more education at some point about why news can't say certain things, why we can't call someone a terrorist straight away and how court cases work, because perhaps people just don't understand that it's not people trying to cover things up, it's that they don't know.
There's been, as you rightly suggested, been a lot of criticism of that, and certainly when I've done phone-ins on the radio, there is this sense that, I mean, many of you may have heard this thought, there's been a D notice that's gone round saying we can't discuss these matters, and others saying you're not saying terrorist because you're hiding, you've been told, and everybody in this room who works in news knows that none of those things have actually taken place. Michelle, when you decided to make that decision to go local, if we can, I want to bring in something that Dave said about music, because I remember when Diana died in the late 90s, Virgin Radio particularly, the original Virgin Radio, suddenly, we'd never seen anything like it, the kind of southern country morning that we had. And the music playlist that very quickly they compiled, I think Graham Dean was on air at the time and others, was remarkable. I mean, do you have that ready for a songs of reflection, a series of songs that are okay?
Yeah. So that's there's a certain sort of categories that you would apply that to. And actually, on the night of the Manchester terror attack, the powers that be decided to drop music altogether. So we went completely speech from 12:30, I think it was. As soon as we knew that there'd been fatalities and dozens of casualties, we dropped music altogether.
Did you get
and
criticism
dropped ads
for that?
as well? No, not at all. And I think when we did. So what we did was everybody opted in, so the whole network opted into Manchester because clearly it became a national, not just a local thing, it became national. So we dropped ads and we dropped music and went completely speech throughout the night. I was doing bulletins every 15 minutes. And I think I lost about a stone running up and downstairs into the studio. And no criticism at all. If anything, the feedback that I know Key 103 has had in particular has been incredible from people saying that the way we reported it, the sensitivity. I think in the aftermath as well, it was really important for me to focus on the positivity and the victims as well, because the thing that happened with Manchester is that we all saw this. Manchester came together, and it was important to reflect that more so than focus on the bomber himself. So obviously we had this active police investigation, all the raids were taking place, but for me it was more important to focus on the victims and the vigils and everything that was taking place, and then mention the police investigation, because obviously that's important. So it's finding that balance, really.
Because your focus had to be the people of Manchester.
Of course,
and particularly the victims and the family of the victims who at that stage, and still the case appallingly with Grenfell Tower, who don't know the well-being or whereabouts of their nearest and dearest, which is just so appalling to consider, and we've all had to be considering that obviously in the last few days. Just lastly, before we move to a film, which I know you'll find incredibly moving, because I know that we all have, to Dave, do you believe that at the current stage, the year we have faced is now the sign that news is changing and the demands of news is changing, and perhaps we need to reconsider what our role is, because we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, and sometimes it is tomorrow?
Well, that's one of the reasons why people come into news, is because you don't know what, you can walk in on a day and you just don't know what's going to happen, and it could be the biggest story you ever cover. But I think the need to be flexible, the need to be agile has always existed. Sky News is a 24-hour news organisation. The night of the London Bridge terror attack, we had an editorial meeting at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. It's completely unheard of. But the beauty is that the people who work in news recognise that there's no such thing as working hours. If something happens, like Michelle, like Lydia, they're at it, and they want to go and do the best for their listeners. And similarly, among my team as well. And bear in mind, we were in the middle of an election campaign, which was a snap election campaign, where we had to bolster our staff. And then these events happened at a time when people were trying to take holidays, and we really have to push our staff to the maximum and really encourage them to get stuck in. And it's a very difficult balance to strike, because we have to consider people's well-being as well. I mean, John Riley, the head of Sky News, sent a note to all staff the other day explaining that we've dealt with some very, very serious incidents recently, and it's going to continue. Grenfell Tower, the story's not over. The Hillsborough inquest took 27 years to come to justice. Grenfell Tower is going to be a lot of questions asked about the legality, the structure. There's personal stories to come out of that. And people's well-being, we're all human beings covering the news as well. We're seeing these images, we're hearing the stories. They're really harrowing, especially when it's involving sort of children as well. And we have to be careful in the style and the tone of our language when we're broadcasting, not to sensationalise, but to put everything into correct context and to be responsible broadcasting.
Thank you for that. And just to end, back to Manchester, which is obviously very emotionally the reason why Chris and the team decided to postpone the festival itself. As a music station, Key 103, which is obviously your station, had to find a quick way of capturing the One Love Manchester mood, which was also obviously mentioned so far this morning. With hours of that attack, edited what you're about to see, which is drone footage with songs, appropriate songs, suitable lyrics, and it's spread across social media. To great success, 1.3 million shares. People wanted to get involved in what had been and still continues to be a tragedy for that city, and hundreds of positive and emotional comments posted as well. Let's have a look.
This is the place in our hearts, in our homes, because this is the place that's a part of our bones, because Manchester gives us such strength from the fact that this is the place. We should give something back.
We only got one year. It's all we got, 1 year. 'Cause we all get lost sometimes, you know, we all got our hands up. Can't run when we dance. It's how we learn, how we grow. We all got our hands up. We shouldn't be fighting on our own. You know, I won't let go. Where is the love? Where is the love? The love and love. I need time, and I hope you know I won't let go. Where is the love? I'm stronger than I've been before. I don't care. Go on, tear me apart. I won't let go.
The place where we stand strong together with a smile on our face. Mancunians forever. Mancunians forever, ever, ever, ever.
This is the part when I let it shine. The part when I turn the night like the 4th of July. 'Cause baby, you're a fire, you are. Come on, show 'em what you are. Make 'em go, as you shoot across the sky.
Forever Manchester. Choose love, Manchester. Thank you.
That from Key 103. Can I thank Chris and the entire Radio Festival team for inviting us? Can I thank Abby Lewis for producing this session, and to our panel as well. It's great to meet you and great to work with you. And it's so good we have events like this where we can all meet together as friends. To Michelle, to Lydia and to Dave, and to all of you, thanks very much indeed.